An Odd Boy, Volume 1 by Ngak'chang Rinpoche. Chapter 5, Part 1. April 1965 to September 1965. Percy's applause. After the Beatles erupted onto the scene, every mother's son wanted to start a group. My first taste of that came just before my 13th birthday, but Steve and I had been talking about it since I was 9. We could see it was possible because Steve's father played in a jazz band. Things looked promising. A whole new world of music was opening up all round us, and we both wished we were older so we could dive headlong into it. There was a lad from St Mary's School who lived between my home and Netherfield. His name was Percy Gordon, and he'd got a group together. They called themselves The Applause, which I never liked much. I thought it clever in its own way, but it lacked magic. It sounded like a gimmick name to me, and it turned out that his father had thought it up. Percy had got a drum kit for Christmas and knew a few lads who'd got their electric guitars the same way. They didn't play marvellously well, but their main problem was that none of them could sing. They all had squeaky voices and needed a vocalist as badly as anyone could need anything. Percy had heard me sing. I was always singing, especially when walking between school and home, because my father wasn't around to frown at me for singing that depraved row. Percy and I walked the same way home from school, and he'd walked behind me on a few occasions, surreptitiously listening. This had gone on for a while, but he caught up to me one day and told me about his group. "Heard you singing," he said by way of introduction. He seemed pleasant at first, if a little smarmy. I decided I'd ignore the smarminess in favour of the friendliness. A stammerer was in no position to be judgmental. He talked about the Beatles, always a good move with me, and told me about the songs he liked. I told him they sang in harmony. He didn't know what that meant, so I explained. Then he told me about his group. He seemed pretty pleased with himself, and obviously expected me to be more impressed than I was. I actually was impressed. I was impressed with anyone who'd got a musical situation together. "Do you play guitar?" he asked. "I'm learning from my friend Steve Bruce," I replied. "He plays guitar, but bass is his main instrument. I hope to play guitar one day, but that means getting my own guitar, and that won't happen for a few more years." I was awaiting my 18th birthday when I was going to get the Gibson EBO bass. That seemed to impress the hell out of him, but he tried to keep it concealed. He also tried to affect some knowledge. "Yeah, Gibbs Emilio, good guitar." He asked me how old I was. Told him 12. He'd just turned 14 and gloated about that fact. I realised at that moment that he'd expected me to be older. I'd grown tall quickly from the age of 10, I'd reached my full adult height early, so people often thought I was older than I was. My voice had broken at the age of 10, so I sounded older too. Realising I was a youngster, Percy shifted from smarmy sycophancy into a slightly imperious condescension. I didn't react to the change, and he backed off a little. He'd expected me to defer to his advanced years, and couldn't quite work out why I doggedly persisted in being who I was. My father had adventitiously given me quite a training in being imperturbable. As few people liked me, I had no great need for people to like me, so no one really ever managed to play me like a fish on a line. We met up a few times on the Aldershot Road, and Percy talked incessantly about his group. He told me they'd been thinking about changing the name to Percy's Applause. I asked him what the others in the group thought of that. That stopped him in his tracks for a moment, but he sprang back with, "They'll go along with whatever I think because I'm the leader and my dad can get us on stage. He's the manager at Aldershot Cinema." I was distinctly unimpressed by that. "You've got the whole thing worked out then." He took that as a compliment and seemed pleased. I'd been to that cinema and seen groups at the weekly talent show, but it was a mime show, and sometimes they only held cardboard or plywood guitar cutouts. It was grim, and I only put up with it to see Zorro afterwards. After a few weeks, Percy plucked up the courage to ask me if I was interested in singing with their group. I guess he'd been weighing the thing up in his mind. I was a stammerer, but I had a voice. I didn't really know what to say because it was not the most exciting proposition as far as I was concerned. I told him, "I'll help out if you like, but I can't be the singer for your band unless you want Steve Bruce as well." I thought this might put him off altogether, but he persisted. "Don't need a bass player, already got one." "Is he good?" I asked. "Steve's been playing since he was 5 and had music lessons since then. Steve's very good." "You don't need to be that good to play bass. The bass is just background and no one really hears it anyway." That surprised me, because I'd heard some good bass playing from Steve and Mark Bruce. I'd heard Mr. Bruce playing jazz bass, and that was fantastic. "Bass is an important instrument in a band," I said, "and in some ways I prefer it to lead and rhythm, especially if the bass player is good, and Steve's brilliant." Percy pulled an irritated face. "You're either interested or not. There are plenty of singers around." So if I didn't make my mind up, they'd ask one of the many other singers who were eager to join them. Well, that was fine by me. "You should take the offers then, because I won't join anything without Steve. I'll help you for a while, but Steve and I are looking to get our own band together." "Well," Percy mumbled, seemingly floored by my nonchalance and uncertain how to follow on from his announcement that many other singers were available for the job. Well, we could probably use a singer for a while and it'd be good experience. There was something that I didn't trust about Percy. I knew this was a whole bunch of nonsense as soon as he said it. He didn't like me that much, that was plain. I could tell just by talking with him. I noticed him wincing when I stammered, and it wasn't particularly a wince of sympathy. He asked, "You don't stutter when you sing, do you?" I replied without a semblance of a stammer, "No, I do not stammer when I sing. Never have, never will." His attitude toward me was pretty transparent, so there was no way he'd choose me above the many other singers, whomsoever they might be. It occurred to me that I could have asked him who these 16-year-olds were who were going to sing with a bunch of 13-year-olds. Or were there more 13-year-olds whose voices had broken than I'd been led to believe? I was always thinking of frightfully witty remarks, but could rarely enunciate with sufficient panache to make it worthwhile. I just repeated that I'd help them out, but that I couldn't be in any group without my friend Steve, not in the long term. Percy went quiet at that point. He must have realised that bravado and threats had got him nowhere. He wrinkled his forehead and said that they were stuck with their bass player, Godfrey Chambers, because he had the PA system. And although he was the poorest member of the group musically, his father was the richest. I saw the problem and liked Percy even less. I decided I'd push the point in order to see where it would go. "So why not have 2 basses?" He looked at me as if I was an imbecile. Anger overcame him and he blurted out, "No one has 2 basses in a band." All the more reason then, I thought, but said nothing. This was tiresome. "As I said, I'll help out if you like, but I don't even own a microphone." That was no problem. Godfrey Chambers had the whole setup. Sure, I'd go and try out, but I wouldn't make any promises. "What songs do you play?" I asked. Percy recited, "I Get Around, Beach Boys, Do-a-diddy-diddy, Manfred Mann, I'm Into Something Good, Herman's Hermits, Glad All Over, Do You Love Me, and Bits and Pieces by the Dave Clark 5. I was slightly aghast. The Dave Clark 5. This was not looking good. Silence. "Well," I ventured, "I like those Manfred Mann songs. What about blues?" A look of confusion was firmly riveted onto Percy's face, so I volunteered a title. "Smokestack Lightning? Howling Wolf?" Percy scowled with evident contempt. "We don't play that kind of music. It's old stuff. We play modern music." I thought for a moment and tried a few songs he might think were modern. "Time Is on My Side, Rolling Stones?" No. "No Particular Place to Go and You Never Can Tell, Chuck Berry?" No. "You Really Got Me, The Kinks?" Maybe House of the Rising Sun, Eric Burdon and the Animals? Percy pondered. "Dunno if Roger can play that. It's got an F in it, hasn't it?" I got the impression that Roger knew one more chord than I did. grim. Yes, it's got an F. It's also got an A minor, C, D, E, E7th and D. Percy's eyes widened. 7 chords. I had problems with F myself, but I wasn't about to disclose that fact. Perceiving me to be a musical high flyer, Percy changed tack. He got friendly again, but in a persuasive manner that left me no choice but to agree to come along and try out with his group. And just to let you know that Ngak'chang Rinpoche is going to be doing an interview about this volume 1 of An Odd Boy. So if you had any questions you wanted to ask him about it, or anything that you've heard in this volume so far, then please do send them in to us. You can put them here on the Facebook page and we'll include them in the interview.